Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Neurotech.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Paul Floch, and he is the co-founder and CEO of Axoft, which is a innovative materials company for neural implants. So it's pretty cool stuff. They've kind of come up with some improvements, I guess, in traditional materials. But anyways, Paul, welcome to the show. Do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
Thank you, Ladan. That's a good intro to start with. I guess a couple of things to add. I come from France, moved to the US about 8 years ago. As you mentioned, graduated from Harvard about 2.5 years ago from my PhD and started Axsoft straight away with two other co-founders who are also from Harvard.
Yeah, very cool. So, okay, so what's the technology? What did you guys spin off? And then was this a spin-off from Harvard? Like this was what you were working on for your PhD, or was it something different?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is a continuation of my PhD work. We develop a new technology of neural interface. I come from the lab of Professor Jie Liu at Harvard, who is a professor in bioengineering, and he works on different systems, work in organoids, work in vivo models, and has the expertise of developing new devices using innovative microfabrication or even develop new materials. And one thing leading to another, I decided that I wanted to continue working on this technology through a venture. I didn't want to stay in academia at the end of my PhD. And I was lucky because I found an amazing co-founder who is CTO of the company, Tianyang, who come from the nanoelectronic space and was developing the CMOS chip that we use for high throughput recording or stimulation of neuron culture, for instance. So there was a nice match of technologies. And the first part of your question was, what is the technology about? And in GLU's group, there is a strong emphasis on developing long-term stable neural interface, being able to track single neuron or multi-unit activity, but also trying to do it at scale. And there's always a trade-off between those two things in the neural interface space. Either you have a system with a lot of capabilities, a lot of resolution and sensors, but usually doesn't last very long, or you can make implants that can last for a longer time, like flexible probes, but they have a very little throughput. So there was always this trade-off, and essentially during my PhD, we came to the conclusion that there is a trade-off because we were limited in the way we can make this system. We're limited in the materials that we can use, and essentially the direction that the field is taking are based on materials and fabrication techniques that have never been optimized for neural interface. If you think about the either silicone or either flexible materials like polyimide or parylene, they have been developed between 50 and 100 years ago, and that was for industrial applications. For instance, polyimide was developed as a high-performance plastic. It's used as a tape. It's used as substrate for flexible electronics. But at the end of the day, it's really not made to be put inside a brain. And now that we see a lot of application emerging in the space of brain-computer interface and neuromodulation based on novel device architecture, it's good time to ask the question, what if we could do something better there and develop solutions that are tailored for this problem instead of borrowing from the semiconductor industry? So that's what Axsoft is about. And definitely there is a strong emphasis on the material. We develop soft materials that have a better long-term biocompatibility, but these are also materials that we can use in micro and nano fabrication and that are very stable inside the brain. So it's a combination of those three aspects that's usually difficult to get. The idea is very simple, but making the material that can do all of that is difficult. So we try to internalize this capability, and at the same time, my co-founder comes in with the expertise that allow us to make it compatible with the standard ways of recording, digitalizing, or sending stimulation to tissues, which is important because if we create a new technology, we need to make sure that the interface with the existing ecosystem is gonna be working well. So yeah, not just about making a material, but making implants with this material that can connect to existing hardware and existing softwares.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's a very big thing that you're doing and kind of developing this material, this system, from the ground up and, making something tailor-made. So I mean, you mentioned, something like polyimide, the parylene, these are off-the-shelf, materials. They're used originally for something else, but seem to be very convenient and work well for neural implants. So how do you know that your material is better? And then, especially with, biocompatibility, we're talking long-term studies
Mhm.
potentially here, many years. So how do you
Yeah.
do these tests without waiting, for example, many
Yeah.
years and seeing that they're better?
Yeah, so we do have some evidence that are either through bench testing or in vivo testing. I started that during my PhD, and over time we've accumulated more evidences, and we still believe that it's the right direction, even a few years after thinking about this. And so, for instance, one thing we look at is the gliosis around the implants over time. And you know that if you make a neural probe small enough in terms of dimensions, in terms of width, in terms of thickness, you will be able to mitigate this. But then the consequence is you have very little number of sensors that you can package. The moment you make it wider and thicker, you start to see this accumulation of scar tissue. So we did some in vivo models where we look at the long-term immune response around, a control implant made of flexible material versus the same geometry of implant that made with the soft material that we develop, and we see a significant drop in the level of gliosis around the implant. And we also observe more neurons, and that correlates with the signal recording that we have, that we can track stable single units for multiple months at a scale where it's usually not recommended. Like you won't make your polymer implant so wide or so big because you know that it won't succeed over time. So that's in that way we're coming up with an alternative that allow, for instance, to make the implants wider and thicker. And why is that important? Well, for instance, for handling, to make it a little bit easier, or even to make the implant longer so that you can reach deeper brain targets. So there are some advantages that were a little bit limited with flexible electronics that we can come up with. And on the bench testing side, it's a very good question. Is like, how do you get this data quickly, given that you're supposed to test for many years? Well, you can come up with models to do accelerated aging. It's never as realistic as an in vivo model, but you can get some insights on the stability of the material. And we've been studying things such as the dielectric stability of thin films of our material, and show that for instance, in saline, at body temperature, they can last for more than a year and a half without significant degradation. So that's one of the key experiments that we've been doing. We're doing more now. We're trying to accelerate the aging test, by increasing temperature and being able to compare to these other materials. And the good thing is, when we see something doesn't work well, we can change it because we design the materials. And I think that's key, is that we came up with an innovation that works well, but we're also aware that it's not the final version of the system. But the difference is that we can come back at the polymer chemistry level and change the way the material is made, or change the structure, or add some fillers or anything that would improve the stability or would improve the mechanical properties. And so far, that's what was limited. So we're trying to create this feedback loop where we can continuously improve the technology.
Okay. Yeah, that's very cool. So yeah, this is interesting, this approach, going from the company side, because you're basically trying to convince, I guess, the community or whoever's going to be using that your solution, your material is better.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I guess sell them this material. So yeah, it does seem like this would be a little bit more for academia, because this could be a long, process, is convincing people. Could be 10 years before you convince a key number of people. So you mentioned not wanting to go into academia, and maybe you're just allergic to it, or like finished, like, oh, I've had enough. But is there another reason you chose to go for this business route versus, I guess, like academia, and kind of a slow, for this, what I see, yeah, kind of like a slow buildup of, convincing people
Yeah.
that your method's better?
Yeah. I guess there are a couple of elements to that. First of all, because it's part of the things I worked on, I was thinking that if I'm not the one trying to get them out there on the market, or being used in medical devices, for instance, nobody else would do it. So I think you have a little bit of a responsibility as a researcher. If you develop something, try to have an impact with it. Otherwise, it can drag. And that's the thing I was worried about is, yeah, we could have done 10 more years of research on this, but with probably little funding and very little amount of resources working on that. When you think about a company developing a cutting edge technology, they never come up with the final solution at early stage. There is iteration, there is improvement over time. And at some point, you need to take this leap of faith that your technology actually has a good edge, that you will have enough resources to make it competitive. And I think we were confident enough about that and about our approach. So it's not just about where you start comparing to the existing technologies, but what is your direction? And our direction of including the molecular design of the material into neural engineering, I think is very different from some other companies. So that were the initial reasons. And then from a practical standpoint, I mean, what you say is very important is we're a company, we're not a research lab, so we need to demonstrate traction, we need to make progress. So what does that mean for a company like us, because we're definitely a deep tech company, but we also want to become a medical device company. And that's usually where there is friction because it's not the same type of investor. It's not the usual timescale for developing a medical device. So how do we deal with that? And I think you need to leverage everything you can as a company. And the good thing is Axsoft is developing technological assets that have a value independently of the ultimate goal. So we're developing materials, we're developing neural probes, and although we're not yet in the medical space, they have a value for research, they have a value for industry. And so we're developing that in the meantime, trying to be cognizant that we have a long-term vision that is to develop chronic implants as medical devices.
Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. I think it's absolutely correct. There's many technologies. There's a graveyard of technologies, by PhD students on promising stuff, and then they graduate and they can't wait to go get a job and make real money and eat meat finally once in their life and be able to do this but then it just becomes abandoned. So I think you're absolutely right that there is a responsibility to take this, especially for promising technologies, and make it commercial, bring it to the lives of people. And then you mentioned investors, and we had talked previously that you went the investment route. So how do you balance that? Like, I mean, this is, as we talked about, this is a long-term thing. This is something that will take 10, maybe 20 years to, gain traction and really bear fruit, I believe. So investors are usually a little bit more short-term focused, and they want, results. They want to cash out their investment in 5 to 7 years. So how do you balance that? How do you let the investors know, like, oh no, this is going to be a long thing?
Yeah, that's an important thing to mention from the get-go in the discussion with investors. And that I think that simply means not all investors are fitted for this type of companies. We're lucky enough that in 2020, and maybe that's something from the last 10 to 15 years, there are deep tech investors that have a longer cycle of return on investment, funds that can have up to 10 years or more of return. And that's how we started. So we've been lucky enough to work with some funds that have this long-term vision and understand that the disruptive change on on any sort of hardware technology is going to take time, but that is valuable. And so definitely we need to be a little bit curated on who we want to work with. And then there is a moment where there is a fine transition where the type of investor will change as the company grows, and we'll need to be able to convince investors are more on the medical side. And I think I'm apprehending this and trying to do everything we can so that we have the relevant milestones to work with them. And it's something that you need to think about a long time in advance because relationship with investors can take years to develop. So yeah, I guess that's where I am now. It's only been 2.5 years, but we're trying to be mindful on the investment strategy.
So what was, in your mind, what was the advantage of doing the investment route versus the non-dilutive grants or something
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, I think so. We're applying for grants and with some level of success in our applications. And the reason we started with the venture side is because we wanted velocity. We wanted to go quickly because we could see all the other companies starting in the BCI space. I mean, everybody knows Neuralink, Precision Neuro, others as well. And we didn't want to miss out on this opportunity because funding for neurotech goes by cycle. And we were seeing there's a cycle now. We have a technology, let's do it rather than wait. And I'm still, if I had to do it again, I would probably do it the same way because I can see, I have a lot of friends who 12 companies. We're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So it's like more than half of the people graduating from the university go start a company. And a lot of them try to bootstrap and to do little grants here and there. And it takes years. It takes years to get to a pre-seed funding. And we were lucky enough that we had the opportunity to skip this. And I think it was the right decision.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. So you were able to skip maybe a few years of progress or kind of like a struggle that other companies might need to go through by being able to do this. So yeah, very cool. Okay, so what's your vision for the company? What do you see your, I guess, material and systems being especially good at? Like what's the killer application, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We want this technology to be used in chronic implants for high resolution recording or stimulation in the brain. So definitely that touches to BCI, brain computer interface application, but also to some in neuromodulation. And this is a long journey because developing a class 3 FDA system, PMA approval, it's going to take a while. We're going to go along this journey progressively, probably developing non-chronic system initially. And yeah, there is an emphasis on that because we develop these materials to have this long-term biocompatibility, but also long-term stability that is required to maintain a high level of performances over time. That's right now, it's one of the factors that prevent the translation of this new technology into the medical space is like, are you really sure it's going to work for 10 years? Or are you really sure you're going to be able to explant it? And we think that with the material approach, we can actually tackle some of those issues that prevent the wide adoption of novel neural implants.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I think that's a long process and it can be, very expensive, FDA approval and everything like this. And so have you guys started this already or where are you guys in terms of the life cycle?
Yeah, so we started to talk with the FDA probably in the first 6 months of the company because even if it's a very big institution, they actually work with small companies. They encourage small companies to reach out to them as soon as possible and have regular discussions. So we got into what is called the breakthrough device program that helps companies that develop technologies that are cutting edge and answer an unmet need that currently there is no device or no solution for specific types of patients. And actually BCI can be part of this breakthrough device program. So we entered that so we can discuss quickly. So that allowed us to receive feedback on pre-submissions. So pre-submissions are essentially it's a document that you submit to the FDA regarding your testing plans, your clinical trials, your device design to get some feedback about it, or about like what might be problematic, what is okay, not okay. It's not an approval, but it helps you to pave the way toward an approval and get feedback instead of preparing everything and then trying to go into the regulatory path and having so many issues because you didn't talk with the FDA about that before. And that can be anything. That can be your device design. That can also be your protocol for sterilization of the device. So you don't necessarily need to have a final product architecture to have finished the product development to actually start talking with the FDA. And it's actually the opposite. The earlier you can talk with them, the better. We're probably going to do this for a long time, but we'll get already gathering feedback on what's going to be important to develop chronic implants. And it's also good to stay in touch with them because the regulation around this chronic implant is evolving, especially with new indication in the BCI space. It's likely to change over the years. So we want to have a good line of communication with them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think from what I've heard, this has definitely improved over the last few years, and the FDA is less of a black box than it used to be. They are very collaborative, and they do want to help you because yeah, there's no worse feeling than spending I don't know $1 million and a year or two collecting data, doing clinical trials, and then finding out that whoops, there was something wrong, and it was an easy mistake, and it would be easy to have fixed it, to have measured something, but now it's over, so you have to go back and and spend that money again, especially if you're burning
Yeah.
money in like a startup. So
Yeah, that's the worst. Can be like setting you back like 6 months or even longer. So we want to avoid that.
yeah, for sure. For sure. So what are some current challenges in the companies? What are you working on? I guess too, how big is the team and what does that look like?
Yeah, the team is about 13 people full time and some interns. It's a really interesting team because they can do everything from designing a material to collecting neural data and analyzing it. So we have polymer person, we have microfabrication, electrical engineering, and a preclinical team for developing surgical techniques, for recording neural data and analyzing them. And we have also a unit that's more on product development and the clinical translation, because we're still at the stage where the technology has a lot of potential and we're demonstrating progress through R&D milestones, basically being able to develop, as you mentioned earlier, implants that challenge the current status quo of like the performances of, flexible probes or silicon probes. So that's very important. And we also have this product development team that is more like working on like how we can work with hospitals to demonstrate some features of the technology, get some preliminary safety data before actually being able to commercialize this as a medical device. Yeah, so it's a really fun team. Lots of people with PhDs and with very deep experience onto one thing. But it's good because even at this small scale, we have started this iteration cycle on the technology that's very important for Axoft, because it's kind of like it's a running hypothesis is we can improve this over time because we can change the material very quickly based on what we see. And it's actually working well enough that we can start to partner with other labs and with industrial who want to try the technology. And initially, that was not so much on our roadmap, but we realized that it's a really great way to demonstrate traction from investors, and also a really great way for us to get users and to get feedback and not spending additional resources to get this feedback inside the company. So we're trying to leverage that now. So you kind of have both sides at Axsoft. This one is more clinical translation and one that's more like the R&D that actually leads to partnerships and some like early commercialization.
Yeah, that's pretty clever, and it seems pretty interesting that you could be able to leverage this and then kind of have a win-win and maybe it doesn't cost you so much. So I guess all this is dependent on where you see the future of neurotech, let's say in 10 years. It sounds like in order to make these kind of bets, you have to bet
Yeah.
that it's going to be much bigger and I guess further along than it is currently. So yeah, I guess 10 years is a pretty good timeline. Where do you see, like, how common do you think neurotech will be? And I don't know, what percentage of the population, for example, will have implants or whatever, let's say in 10 years?
Yeah, so I think in 10 years you will have like, I don't know, between 3 and 5 very novel implant technologies that will be FDA approved for chronic use for different indication, whether it's BCI or treatment-resistant depression or other things. And that's going to change people's opinion on these technologies. And I think it will still be the days of early adoptions, but you will have, thousands of patients in the US benefiting from these devices. Right now, it's a handful. So that would be a big step forward. And definitely Axsoft is we develop this technology assuming that, yeah, neurotechnology is going to be like have a very big impact on society. That's clearly a running hypothesis for us. And yeah, at that time, I would not be surprised if I know someone who has an implant or know someone who knows someone who has one. Definitely 1 or 2 persons away from me.
Yeah, that's pretty. That is, I hope it's like that, and I hope it's going to be, coming like this in the future. Well, Paul, this has been a great introduction for your company. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
Well, we are always on the lookout for great candidates to join the team. We're fundraising this year. The team is going to expand on all sides. So we welcome any candidates. There is a link on our website to apply. And you can also email us or connect with us on LinkedIn and follow the company.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.